Hollywood, 1947. The most powerful woman in the music industry was about to make a decision that would destroy her own career to save someone else's. Kay Thompson sat in her corner office at MGM, watching four young men rehearse through the soundproof glass. She was 38 years old, head of the vocal department, and commanded more respect in this town than most studio chiefs. Her arrangements had made stars. Her voice had defined a generation. Her word could launch careers or end them with a single phone call. But as she watched the youngest Williams brother hit a high note that seemed to come from somewhere beyond technique, something shifted inside her chest. Andy Williams was 19 years old and he had no idea what was about to happen to him. The Williams brothers had been performing since childhood, four farm boys from Iowa who harmonized like they shared the same heartbeat. Bob, Don, Dick, and Andy had conquered radio, conquered the nightclub circuit, and now they were conquering Hollywood. They were wholesome, talented, and safe. Everything the post-war world wanted to believe America could be again. Kay Thompson was none of those things. She had clawed her way to the top of the most cutthroat business in the world. She had survived two failed marriages, industry sexism, and the constant pressure to prove herself in a room full of men who thought women belonged in front of microphones, not behind them. She was brilliant, ambitious, and dangerous. Her laugh could fill a room, but her silence could empty one just as quickly. When she met the Williams brothers in the spring of 1947, Kay was looking for backup singers for a new nightclub act she was developing. The boys needed work. Their movie contracts had been canceled when Bob was drafted, and now that he was back, they were starting over. It should have been a simple business arrangement. It wasn't. Andy had a quality that Kay had only seen in a handful of performers. Not just talent, though he had that in abundance. Something deeper, a vulnerability that made people want to lean forward when he sang, as if he was sharing a secret meant only for them. When he looked at her during rehearsals, asking if he was hitting the phrasing correctly, Kay felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt protective. The age difference was impossible to ignore. When Andy was born, Kay had already been performing professionally for 7 years. When he learned to read, she was arranging for radio shows in Chicago. When he sang his first solo in church, she was already divorced and living in New York City. But in the rehearsal room, when they worked together on arrangements, the years between them seemed to dissolve. Kay began staying later at the studio. Just to work on the arrangements, she told herself. Just to make sure the boys were ready for their Las Vegas debut. But when the other brothers left, Andy would linger. He had questions about phrasing, about breathing, about the music business. Kay had answers. She always had answers. The first time they were alone together, really alone, was on a Tuesday evening in June. The studio was empty except for the security guard making his rounds. Andy was struggling with a particularly difficult passage, and Kay moved to the piano bench beside him to demonstrate. Their shoulders touched. Andy turned to look at her, and for a moment neither of them moved. "You're going to be something special, Andy Williams," Kay said quietly. "Because of you," he replied. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just two people recognizing something that couldn't be undone. The affair began slowly, carefully. Kay had too much to lose, and Andy had too much to learn. They met in her office after hours, supposedly to work on arrangements. They had dinner at small restaurants on the outskirts of the city where no one from the industry would see them. They talked about music, about art, about dreams that seemed both possible and impossible. Kay had never been anyone's mentor before. She had always been too busy fighting her own battles to worry about someone else's career. But with Andy, she found herself making phone calls, arranging meetings, opening doors that had taken her years to get through herself. She introduced him to the right people. She taught him how to carry himself in a room full of executives. She showed him how to protect his voice, his image, his heart. The transformation was remarkable. Andy had always been talented, but under Kay's guidance, he became polished, confident. He learned to trust his instincts because Kay taught him that his instincts were worth trusting. When he sang now, there was something new in his voice, a maturity that hadn't been there before. Kay Thompson and the Williams brothers opened at the El Rancho Casino in Las Vegas in August 1947. The act was unlike anything Vegas had seen before. Kay's manic energy combined with the brothers' harmonies created something electric, sophisticated, and completely original. They became an overnight sensation, earning more money than any nightclub act in history. But success came with scrutiny. In hotel rooms and dressing rooms, Kay and Andy found moments to be alone. A touch of hands when passing sheet music, a lingering look across a crowded room, a kiss stolen in the shadows behind the stage. They were careful, always careful. The age difference would have been scandalous enough. The power dynamic would have made it worse. In 1947, a 38-year-old woman having an affair with a 19-year-old man wasn't just gossip material, it was career suicide. Andy's brothers noticed the change in their youngest sibling, but they couldn't quite identify what it was. He seemed older somehow, more focused, more driven. When Kay made suggestions about their arrangements, Andy supported her with an enthusiasm that went beyond professional respect. But the brothers attributed it to gratitude. Andy had always been the most appreciative of Kay's help with their career. They had no idea that in hotel rooms across the country, Kay was teaching Andy lessons that had nothing to do with music. The summer of 1948 changed everything. Kay rented a house on Nantucket Island, a world away from the glittering nightclubs and recording studios. For 6 weeks, she and Andy lived together as if they were any couple spending a quiet summer by the ocean. They walked on the beach at dawn. They read books in the afternoon sun. They made love with the windows open, listening to the sound of waves against the shore. It was the only time in their entire relationship when they didn't have to hide. Andy had never experienced anything like it. Kay was sophisticated in ways that made him feel both young and ancient at the same time. She introduced him to art, to literature, to wine, to a world of experiences he had never imagined. But more than that, she believed in him with a fierceness that sometimes frightened him. She saw potential in him that he couldn't see in himself, and she was willing to sacrifice everything to help him achieve it. Because that's exactly what she was doing. That fall, Kay was offered a $1 million contract to perform without the Williams brothers. It was the deal of a lifetime, a chance to establish herself as the highest paid female performer in the country. She turned it down. Instead, she structured her contract so that she could appear with or without the boys, ensuring that Andy's career would always be protected, even if her own suffered. The brothers never knew about the sacrifice. They assumed Kay's loyalty was purely business. Only Andy understood what she had given up for him, and the weight of that knowledge changed him. He began to carry himself with a gravity that seemed older than his years. Success wasn't just about talent anymore. It was about responsibility. Someone had bet everything on him, and he couldn't let her down. Their relationship deepened in ways that went far beyond the physical. Kay became Andy's closest confidant, his harshest critic, and his most devoted supporter. She shaped not just his career, but his character. She taught him how to be gracious in success and resilient in failure. She showed him how to treat people with kindness without being naive, how to be ambitious without being cruel. But by 1949, the strain was beginning to show. The constant secrecy, the careful choreography of their public interactions, the knowledge that they were living a lie that could destroy both their careers. Kay was getting older, and Andy was getting famous. The questions from reporters became more pointed, the speculation more dangerous. The Williams Brothers act broke up in 1949, but Kay and Andy found ways to continue working together. She arranged for him to sing backup on her recordings. She helped him get solo gigs at small clubs. She used every connection she had built over 20 years in the business to keep his career moving forward, even when it meant stepping back from her own opportunities. Andy's gratitude was complete, but it was also becoming complicated by guilt. He was young, attractive, and increasingly famous. Other women were interested. Other opportunities were presenting themselves. But every time he considered a different path, he saw Kay's face. The woman who had given up everything for him. The woman who loved him with a purity that he wasn't sure he could return forever. The end came gradually, then all at once. In 1954, Kay used her influence to get Andy a regular spot on Steve Allen's new late-night television show. It was the break that would change everything, the platform that would make him a star in his own right. But it also meant Andy would be living in New York, performing 5 nights a week, building a career that would inevitably take him away from the woman who had made it possible. For 2.5 years, Andy commuted between his new television career and his secret life with Kay. But the balance was becoming impossible to maintain. Andy was 27 years old now, no longer the wide-eyed kid who had needed Kay's protection. He had his own money, his own connections, his own dreams. And while he loved Kay deeply, he was beginning to understand that love and gratitude weren't always the same thing. The conversation that ended their affair took place in Kay's apartment in New York in the winter of 1960. Andy had been offered his own television variety show, a chance to become a household name, but accepting it would mean a schedule that would make their relationship impossible to sustain. "Take it," Kay said simply. "What about us?" Andy asked. Kay smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. "Andy, I've been preparing you for this moment since the day we met. You're ready now. You don't need me anymore." "I'll always need you." "No," she said gently. "You'll always be grateful to me, but that's not the same thing." They both knew it was over, but they continued to work together professionally for another year. Kay arranged his songs for the new television show. She coached him through his early performances. She celebrated his successes with the same fierce pride she had always shown. But the intimate part of their relationship was finished, closed with the same grace and dignity that had defined it from the beginning. In December 1961, Andy Williams married Claudine Longet, a beautiful young French dancer he had met in Las Vegas. The wedding was covered by all the major entertainment magazines. Andy looked happy, handsome, and ready for the next chapter of his life. Kay Thompson was not at the wedding. Instead, she moved to Rome, where she began work on a series of children's books about a precocious little girl who lived at the Plaza Hotel. The books would make her more famous than her music ever had, but they also represented a complete reinvention. Kay had closed one chapter of her life to begin another, just as she had taught Andy to do. Years later, when reporters asked Andy about his early career, he would always mention Kay Thompson's influence. He spoke about her talent, her vision, her incredible generosity in sharing her knowledge with young performers. What he never discussed was the personal relationship that had shaped him more than any professional one ever could. In his 2009 memoir, published when he was 81 years old, Andy finally acknowledged what industry insiders had whispered about for decades. Yes, he wrote, he and Kay had been lovers. Yes, the age difference had been significant. Yes, she had used her power and influence to build his career in ways that went far beyond professional courtesy. But what he wanted people to understand, he wrote, was that Kay Thompson had loved him enough to let him go. In a business built on possession and control, she had given him the rarest gift possible, his freedom. Kay Thompson died in 1998, 2 weeks after Frank Sinatra. She was 88 years old, and she had lived to see Andy Williams become exactly what she had always known he could be. A gentleman, a professional, and a star who had never forgotten the difference between success and character. At her memorial service, Andy Williams was one of the speakers. He told the gathered mourners about Kay's incredible talent, her groundbreaking work as a vocal arranger, her contributions to American entertainment. He spoke about her mentorship, her friendship, and her influence on his career. What he didn't say, but everyone who knew them understood, was that Kay Thompson had loved Andy Williams enough to sacrifice her own happiness for his. And Andy Williams had loved her enough to become worthy of that sacrifice. That kind of love doesn't have a name. It doesn't fit into the neat categories that people use to define relationships. It exists in the space between gratitude and devotion, between mentorship and passion, between what was and what had to be. In the end, their affair was forbidden, not because of age or power or scandal. It was forbidden because it was too pure to survive in a world that demands everything to be labeled, categorized, and ultimately consumed. But it happened, and it mattered, and it changed two lives in ways that echoed for decades. Andy Williams spent 70 years in show business and never had another mentor like Kay Thompson. Kay Thompson spent 50 years creating art and never had another student like Andy Williams. Some stories are too big for the people who live them. This was one of them.